The clock in the grand mansion struck 6 p.m. as Victor Delacroix, a wealthy businessman and widower for 5 years, decided to return home earlier than planned. He had left early that morning for an important meeting, but when it ended, he felt a sudden urge to return home sooner than usual. Without notifying anyone, he simply got into his car and drove down the long avenue leading to his estate. Since his wife's passing, raising his young son, Emile, had been left to a series of nannies. Yet, none of them seemed to last. Emile wasn't a difficult child, but he had become withdrawn and melancholy until she arrived. Isabella, a young orphan barely 20 years old, quickly earned both the child's affection and Victor's trust. Her kindness, patience, and dedication achieved what no one else had managed in years, bringing back Emile's laughter. For the first time in a long while, the boy seemed happy. When Victor entered the mansion, the place was unusually silent. At this hour, he was used to hearing Emile's laughter while playing with Isabella, whether in the garden or the living room. Frowning, he stepped through the foyer, placing his briefcase on the table. With quiet steps, he made his way upstairs, wondering if his son might be asleep. Reaching Emile's room, he paused at the slightly open door. Inside, Isabella sat on the floor beside the boy. They weren't playing or laughing. She held a small hardcover book, reading softly. But what truly captured Victor's attention was Emile's face. His eyes, filled with tears, were fixed on Isabella with an intensity Victor had never seen before. "And so," Isabella whispered, "the Star Mother kept shining from the sky, always watching over her little one, always near, always with love." Emile sobbed and threw himself into Isabella's arms, burying his face in her chest. She embraced him with infinite tenderness, gently stroking his hair. "Do you think my mom still watches me?" Emile asked between sobs. Isabella's eyes softened with sadness, and she nodded. "I'm sure she does," she replied softly. "Your mom loves you with all her heart. She would never stop caring for you, even from the sky." Victor felt a lump form in his throat. For years, he had avoided speaking about his late wife with Emile, believing that ignoring the pain would make it fade. But at that moment, he realized how wrong he had been. His son had carried a silent grief, one he never dared to express until Isabella entered their lives. Clearing his throat, Victor stepped into the room. Isabella looked up immediately, her face paling at the sight of him. Emile, his eyes swollen from crying, turned to his father, his expression tense with fear, as if expecting to be scolded. But Victor did not scold them. Instead, he slowly approached, knelt down, and pulled his son into a firm embrace. He held him tightly, allowing the boy to cry on his shoulder. It was the first time in years that he felt so close to his son. "I'm sorry, son," Victor whispered, his voice thick with emotion. "I miss her too." Isabella watched the scene, her own eyes brimming with tears. She felt she should leave and give them privacy, but as she started to rise, Victor met her gaze and shook his head. "Thank you," he said, his voice low but steady. Isabella nodded softly, unsure of what to say. That night, after Emile had fallen asleep, Victor invited Isabella to join him on the terrace. The night breeze was gentle, and the sky sparkled with countless stars. "You've done more for Emile in a few months than I have in years," he admitted, his eyes on the glass of wine in his hand. "I thought that avoiding the topic of my wife was the easiest way to move forward. But you gave Emile something I never could, the truth and comfort." "I never meant to overstep, Mr. Delacroix," Isabella replied, her voice soft and hesitant. "But I know what it's like to lose someone and feel like no one talks about it. Sometimes, silence hurts more than words." Victor turned to her, his expression curious. He knew she was an orphan but had never asked about her past. "Did you lose your parents when you were very young?" he asked gently. She nodded, fiddling with the edge of her dress. "I don't remember my mother, but I do remember my father. He was a hard-working man." Her voice trembled slightly, but an accident left him bedridden. When he passed away, I had no one left. I grew up in an orphanage until I turned 18 and could leave to find work. Victor felt a sharp pang in his chest, not only from her story but from realizing how deeply she understood Emil's pain. She, too, had faced the world alone, without a parent's love. "I don't want you to leave this job," he said suddenly. "But more than that, I want you to stay in Emil's life. You're important to him." Isabella's eyes widened in surprise. Of course I'll stay," she replied softly. "I couldn't leave even if I wanted to. Emil is a very special boy." For the first time in a long while, Victor smiled. The months that followed only strengthened their bond. Emil grew more open and expressive. Victor became more involved in his son's life, and he often found himself talking with Isabella about more than just Emil. One day, as they watched Emil playing joyfully in the garden, Victor's hand found hers. Isabella turned, startled, and met his gaze. But this time there was something different, something unspoken yet deeply understood. "Thank you," he whispered, "for teaching us to feel again." He didn't need to say more. They both knew that somehow fate had brought them together for reasons they were only beginning to understand. Because sometimes love and healing come from the most unexpected places. The pain of the past doesn't fade by ignoring it, but sharing it with someone who understands can mend even the deepest wounds. And though facing the past may be difficult, it is the first step toward building a better future.